Welcome, California reviewers. This short video will assist you in navigating Takeoff by IXL. Once you log into your account, you will see the green navigation bar at the top of the page. All of your Takeoff core curriculum resources are found under this Takeoff tab. You can easily navigate between grade levels by clicking on the white bar. I am going to select third grade. And now that we're on the third grade landing page, by scrolling down, you'll see the particular scope and sequence for this grade level. And you'll also find the number of units by looking at this left-hand sidebar. Each takeoff unit is aligned to the California state standards, and you can see those identified here and also connected to the big idea. You'll also find under this overview section an overview of what students are learning, as well as the number of days allotted, so that the entire curriculum can easily be implemented within a typical school year. Now, in order to access a particular unit, you can click on View Unit Outline. I am going to do that right now for Unit 1. And let's take a look at the top resources that are provided. So as you click on the Overview tab, you will find the cluster of standards that are supported by that big idea. We've also included the mathematical practices. And then you'll also see a summary of what students are going to learn. The Objectives tab does just that. It identifies each of the objectives covered in the unit, as well as the particular standard that will support that objective. And then the instructional context section is really about coherence. This is providing that 360-degree view of how the content coherently fits the big picture, and then its connection to previous and future grade levels. And then finally, the Math Practices tab specifically provides information on those mathematical practices, how they're developed through the unit, and then also suggestions for how teachers can instill these practices in their students, which is super helpful. On the left-hand side, as you're navigating, you can see each of the lessons. And then because this particular unit has 15 lessons, there will be 2 built-in unit reviews and also personalization days. And I'm going to jump into lesson 1.7 so that we can take a deeper dive. And as you look at lesson 1.7, again, this will be somewhat familiar to the format at the unit level. The goals are listed, which include those objectives, the aligned standards and mathematical practices for this particular unit. And then this is super helpful. This is the lesson's main takeaway in student-friendly language. As we look at that instructional context, again, now you're going to see that 360-degree view at the lesson level. And remember, it's going to draw connections from previous and future lessons and grade levels. But this is an also really important thing to remember, that with Takeoff by IXL, you will have access to all the digital resources in grades K through 5. So again, really allowing you to make math accessible to all students. And then finally, the Additional Supports tab provides resources, again, to make math accessible. So the readiness skills, which again, remember, they are adaptive in nature, help prepare students for the lesson. And then there are language tips provided to support English learners. Now, as I scroll down through the lesson, you'll find your material section. And this particular area will provide links to all the printable resources needed, as well as the physical objects. So you can see here the student book, the independent practice book. These materials, again, if I click on student book, you'll see are also available in Spanish. So again, they're easily labeled for the lesson. When I scroll down to the lesson outline, you're going to find a consistent structure to all the lessons. So again, each lesson will start with the instruction, the guided practice, and independent practice. Lessons that have an environmental principles lesson will be labeled here. And this is really important to note, as in chapter 1 in the framework focuses on integrating environmental literacy in the classroom. So let's take a look at the overall structure of the lesson. And we'll start by the instruction piece. Let's take note of the warm-up section, which again, this is taking part during the instruction part, and this will activate students' prior knowledge. I know we talked about this a little bit in April when we met, that the instruction that takes place is really the role, remember, of the teacher being the facilitator. We've moved away from that I do, we do, you do, that we want students engaged and taking part in that productive struggle. So as we move through that lesson, we are providing the support of teacher notes for teachers for a number of reasons. We want to make sure that these notes help lead or support in meaningful discussions, that teachers are able to address learning gaps early, also use effective questioning techniques, again, to make sure that the instruction is both equitable and engaging, as is called for in the framework. And then throughout the lesson, and this will take place in each of the parts of the lesson, whether it's instruction, guided practice, etc., you'll find those built-in tips for support. Again, making sure that we're making grade level math accessible for all students. And then anytime you see a box around a particular activity, that's a way to let you know that these are the learning activities that students see in their student workbooks. And then as we scroll a little bit more, you'll continue to see those teacher notes, but I do want to call out these ideas for extension, because this is where you'll find those enrichment activities to extend mathematical thinking, again, at point of use. And then throughout the lesson, we include models and manipulatives. And you'll see these very consistently because we're using them to make sure that we are building conceptual understanding. Along the same lines of seeing those consistent models, you'll also find opportunities built in for mathematical discourse. So this particular example is students using a think and talk. Again, we want to make sure that every student's voice is heard. And then I'm going to scroll through the rest of the instruction. Again, you'll see additional models. And then we'll move to the guided practice piece. And again, we follow a very similar format. The teacher notes, anything that's in a box, I know is in the student workbook. Okay. Various models, also with answers provided. You're going to continue to see those tips for support. And again, tips for extension along the way. And then as we continue to scroll, you'll also find real-world problems that address the framework's emphasis on authentic context and data are included. And there's a nice example of that in number 12. Now, as we approach the independent practice part of the lesson, you're going to find suggestions for independent practice. Options are available in written practice. So again, the independent practice book. And then you will also find online skill practice. And then again, just as a quick reminder, these skills are adaptive in nature and they're accessible in over 90 languages. So for example, I can access this particular adaptive skill in Spanish. I also have opportunities for students to learn with an example or explore with a video tutorial.
In this video, we'll estimate sums and differences in word problems. Let's get started.
Okay, and I'm just going to scroll back. And then, as I mentioned when we looked at the overall lesson structure, here's where you will find the environmental principles lesson, again, with the teacher notes and the resources that are needed. So again, that's the structure of the lesson. We talked in the beginning that we had dedicated review days built in. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom of this lesson. Notice there are two because this lesson, this unit has 15 lessons, so it's a little longer. So we're going to provide two opportunities for review and assessment. But let's look at this particular unit review. And these are really built in to give students an opportunity to practice everything they've learned before taking the assessment. And again, students have the opportunity to use their student book, their independent book, but we've also included some games and other activities in order to give them that time to do the review. And then once they've done the review, we can scroll again right to the left-hand sidebar. And let's take a look at the end of unit test. Each of these assessments includes tech enhanced standard to aligned assessment, and the data here will fuel that personalization day, which we talked about being one of the most unique features of Takeoff. The assessments can be administered online, paper and pencil, and they're also available in Spanish. So I'll scroll down a little bit here just so that you can see the variety of question types. And then once students take this assessment, the data is going to appear on this personalization day. And if I just scroll down to the personalization day right here, what you want to do is click on the quiz analysis for Unit 1. And then this quiz analysis report provides information and insight about students' performance. I always like to say this is where the magic happens, as this information will fuel the personalization day. It gives me a real quick glance at what students need in order to be successful in this particular objectives and standards. So now when I take a look at the personalization day, remember, this is going to provide the exact skills each student should work on to address the objectives they have not met, as you see in these first several objectives, or also what students need to do to take learning to the next level, as you can see in this enrichment piece. And then remember, each of these adaptive skills are going to provide that personalized practice for students in over 90 languages, both before the lesson and after the lesson. And then for smaller groups, teachers have the opportunity to start a group jam, and that would allow them to work on questions in real time. And you can access that literally by clicking on the group jam, and the students for that particular group jam have already been selected, and you literally just have to click select group jam. And then also, when applicable, performance tasks can be found at the end of the unit's personalization day. So if you look here, I'm looking in Unit 6, and here's an example of a performance assessment where students are focusing on an ice cream shop and needing a freezer to display the ice cream, where they do a lot of work with measurement, et cetera. So again, that's an area where you're able to go in and find those performance assessments. Also, please be sure to visit the additional resources tab, which is at the very bottom. You'll find additional online games, spiral review, teacher planning guide, and student reflections. So this particular tab has a plethora of resources available to support both teachers and students. As you continue to explore Takeoff, please feel free to use the navigation guide that was provided with your resources, which is available both digitally and in your binder. And thank you again for taking the time to explore Takeoff by IXL. Have a great rest of your day.